This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Gidu-Yuwat. It's Monday, June 21st. This is Africa 54. We continue to work remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what hasn't changed is our commitment to bringing you the latest and most important news from the African continent and around the world. This is today's Africa 54. Polls in Ethiopia on Monday are closed or will be closing shortly in the 6th Parliamentary and Regional Councils elections. In Addis Ababa, voters began to arrive shortly before polls opened at 6 a.m. Some polling stations saw long lines of voters with security personnel watching from outside the premises. The country has introduced transparent ballot boxes for the first time. More than 37 million voters were eligible to cast ballots at polling stations across Ethiopia in a pivotal election in Africa's second most populous nation. Results of the vote could reverberate beyond Ethiopia. The Horn of Africa nation is a diplomatic heavyweight in a volatile region, providing peacekeepers to Somalia, Sudan, and South Sudan. It also is one of the world's biggest frontier markets. For more background, as the vote is being touted as Ethiopia's first attempt at free and fair elections, here's Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori with more.
Monday's national polls are being touted by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed as the country's first attempt at free and fair elections. Tirsit Emmanuel, who works for the National Election Board of Ethiopia, wants to make sure people don't make a mistake. And she is enthusiastic about taking part herself.
It's my first time to elect, so I'm really excited. I can't wait.
But not everyone is voting Monday. The election has been delayed in 110 out of 547 constituencies because of logistical problems and violent conflicts, such as in the northern Tigray region. No date has been set for voting in Tigray, where Ethiopia's military has been fighting the region's former governing party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Some opposition parties are also boycotting the elections over what they describe as harassment of their members. On Saturday, police officers in the capital dressed in riot gear as they took part in a parade to display their new uniforms. Abiy has said Ethiopia will show the world that it can hold a peaceful election, his first test of voter support since coming to power in 2018. Since then, he's brought in sweeping democratic reforms, but he has also faced international pressure over the Tigray conflict and allegations from rights groups that his government has rolled back on the country's new freedoms. His spokesperson declined to comment.
That was Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori reporting. Sunday marked United Nations World Refugee Day, and families in the Tigray region of Ethiopia continue to be forced to flee war, often only to be displaced again by violence or the massive social and economic crisis. Viewers Heather Murdoch has more from Shire, Ethiopia.
At this camp in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, families pack up their things swiftly. But it isn't much. Most of their belongings were left behind when they fled the war. Soldiers here say the university campus where these families are being hosted needs to open and people have to leave immediately. Vehicles that locals call bajajes line up to transport people and goods at cheap prices as another camp is set up across town.
They told us we have to leave a month ago, and since then they have come every few days. The only difference is now they are using force.
UN officials briefly visit, saying the new camp is not ready and the move is unjust. But they quickly concede to local forces and tell people to follow the soldiers' orders. Worldwide, an estimated more than 80 million people are displaced from their homes, forced to flee war or persecution. Nearly 60% remain in their home countries, sometimes forced to flee the same conflict over and over again. In Tigray, many displaced families were split up in the chaos, with about 2 million people fleeing within Ethiopia and more than 60,000 people crossing the border to take refuge in Sudan.
So many people fled to Sudan, but I was pregnant and couldn't get that far.
After she fled, she says, her husband was arrested and her cattle confiscated. She says she cannot imagine raising 4 children in the camp, but she also does not think it will ever be safe to go home. The war in Tigray began last November when the Tigray People's Liberation Front attacked northern federal bases and the Ethiopian National Defense Force swept through the region. Eritrean forces are fighting with the federal government, and both sides also have associated militias. Civilians in Tigray have reported widespread looting, beatings, mass killings, and rapes. Much of the region is in danger of famine, which is already occurring in some places. And on top of these horrors, the economy has been crushed. Cities are packed with displaced families, while farms go untended and food is not grown.
I was a farmer with good land, and I grew sorghum, but I was displaced just before the harvest and arrived here with nothing.
The global population of forcibly displaced people has more than doubled in the past decade, and in Tigray, locals say numbers keep growing. On Monday, Ethiopians in most of the country will go to the polls for the first national election in 6 years. But in Tigray, there will be no voting, only praying for relief after nearly 8 months of war. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, Shira, Ethiopia.
Since the war in Syria broke out a decade ago, refugees have fled to countries in the Middle East and Europe, as well as to countries in Africa that face instability like Somalia. And as Mohamed reports from Mogadishu, Somali officials say Syrian refugees are enriching the host nation culturally and economically.
Zakariye Azerkan is a Syrian refugee who fled civil war in his homeland 2 years ago to seek opportunities in Somalia, a country that is still recovering from internal conflict. Now, he is chef and manager of Al Warda Al-Shamia, a popular Syrian restaurant in Mogadishu.
I expect other Syrians will find opportunities here and to open new projects, even though Somalia is still emerging from war. There are Syrian dentists who have opened clinics and even other doctors with various specialties who operate medical centers.
Azerkani's restaurant serves as a meeting place for Mogadishu's Syrian community. Recent arrivals to the city come here for orientation. 13-year-old Mohamed Musa and his family arrived in Mogadishu just a few days ago. They dine with Somali locals who are now accustomed to Syrian cuisine.
I urge all Syrian immigrants or even Somalis to come to this restaurant because the food here is irresistible. It feels as if I am back home in my country.
Dr. Mohamud Salih is among the Syrian refugee medical professionals offering their healing skills to a country that lost most of its skilled workers to civil war, poverty, and years of lawlessness. Salih has been in Somalia for the past 4 years and has fully integrated with the local community. The dental surgeon runs one of the best equipped clinics in Mogadishu and is credited for performing safe, successful operations. Salih says he has settled here with his family.
I now consider myself a Somali citizen through the fact that I have been here for 4 years with my wife and children who are attending Somali schools. We are following the Somali life like other Somali citizens, and my family also considers themselves as Somali.
Syrians who chose to find refuge in Somalia away from their war-torn country may have been driven by the good historical relations between the two countries. In their peace times, both countries shared similar political ideologies. Abdulwahab Sheikh is a Somali scholar and an expert on international relations and culture.
There has been a long-standing relationship between the two nations that began during the military regime that ruled Somalia and the Ba'ath-led government in Syria. These strong bilateral relations remained, and after Syria became engulfed in civil war, some opted to come to Somalia, where there are no visa restrictions for Syrian citizens.
There is no official data on the number of Syrian refugees living in Mogadishu, and not all are as successful as Azerkan and Salih. What is clear is that many of these refugees are making a positive contribution to the local economy and culture. Mohamed Sheikh for VOA News, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Gbagbo, ousted by a civil war and acquitted of civil crimes by the International Criminal Court, is back on Ivory Coast soil after a decade in exile. David Doyle reports.
After a decade in exile, Ivory Coast's former president arrived back in the country on Thursday. Laurent Gbagbo was ousted during a civil war in 2011. He then went on trial at the International Criminal Court over the conflict. Since his acquittal on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity in 2019, his supporters, like Christelle Achan, have been eagerly awaiting his return.
It's all we wanted, one day of glory. We erase our 10 years of suffering. We won everything. Nothing to say, simply thanks to God because he gave us back our father.
Gbagbo's refusal to concede to now President Alassane Ouattara following a 2010 election prompted the civil war in which more than 3,000 people died. Ouattara's government and Gbagbo's camp have said they hope his return will reconcile the nation. Nevertheless, security was tight and police fired tear gas to control crowds as thousands of overjoyed supporters ran alongside Gbagbo's convoy. Ivory Coast still experiences bouts of political and ethnic violence. At least 85 people were killed in bloodshed centred on last October's election. Gbagbo, whose first stop was his party headquarters, has said little about what political role he might now play. He retains firm support, particularly in the country's south and west, but he also faces an outstanding 20-year prison sentence. It was handed down in November 2019 on charges he misappropriated funds from a West African regional central bank. Ouattara's government has not said whether it plans to enforce the verdict.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. Nigerian lawmakers are set to vote on a bill criminalizing ransom payments after reports that payoffs were made to resolve a series of mass kidnappings. The bill, which would impose stiff prison sentences, is being criticized by relatives of kidnapped victims. Timothy Obiezu reports from Kaduna, where many kidnappings have taken place recently.
Paul Michelia and his wife woke up one morning in March to the frightening news that their son had been kidnapped from a forestry college in Kaduna State. Yahaya Michelia was taken along with 38 others and marched through the bush for 21 days with few stops.
If you get tired, they just kill you and continue moving. You can't just say you're tired. They waste anyhow. So no matter how tired you are, you just have to keep moving.
He was eventually released in early May. Also freed were Friday Sani's two girls, Victory and Rejoice Sani, who were among the kidnapped students. While they were held, their captors contacted school authorities to demand a $1.2 million ransom from the government.
When they told us that they don't need our parents' money, we were a bit relieved because we thought that since it's government, we will not stay long there.
But the government did not pay, and parents of the kidnapped victims negotiated a ransom. Nigerian authorities strongly opposed these ransom payments, saying it only makes the kidnappers more powerful. Now, lawmakers are to vote soon on a controversial bill introduced last month to punish those who pay ransom by up to 15 years in prison. Security expert Ebenezer Oyetakin supports the government's bill.
It is a very difficult decision, but it is a decision that is worth taking because actually when you pay this ransom, maybe 500 million, 800 million, you have empowered them to purchase more bazookas, AK-47. It will encourage others who will also want to venture into it.
But the parents of kidnapped victims like Friday Sani, who negotiated a ransom for their daughter's release, opposed the bill.
It is better I do it, let my children come out and be under the roof of their father, let the government arrest me. Then we meet in court.
There is no how we'll fold our hand and watch our children in the bush, and then you tell us anybody who negotiate the life of his child will be persecuted.
Armed groups seeking ransoms have increasingly been kidnapping students from northern Nigerian schools. Around 1,000 students are estimated to have been kidnapped in mass raids since December. While most have been freed, the release of those still held by captors is still hanging in the balance. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Kaduna, Nigeria.
We would like to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. Our address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, an insight into America's newest federal holiday, Juneteenth. We'll be right back.
Be sure to join me on the next Straight Talk Africa. We'll take you to the movies as internet streaming giants battle for top billing and online audiences across Africa. We ask who's winning and who's watching. We'll also look at the growing demand for homemade stories by Africans, for Africans, and about Africans. We'll have it all right here on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Juneteenth is America's newest federal holiday after President Joe Biden signed it into law on Thursday. But African Americans have celebrated every June 19th since 1865, when the last enslaved blacks learned of their freedom on that date, 2.5 years after President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. It has also been a day to reflect on their struggle for freedom and justice, and to teach vital history to younger generations. VOA correspondent Mariama Diallo has more.
Across America, people have celebrated Juneteenth or Freedom Day every year since June 19, 1865. Kelly Elaine Navies is a museum specialist and oral historian at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington.
On June 19, 1865, General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, with a force of 1,800 Union troops, many of whom were actually United States colored troops, and announced General Order 3, stating that the enslaved were now free. This was important because although the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed on January 1st, 1863, that really only impacted states in the Confederacy, and then only states where there was a Union presence.
Navies says that when she was a child, her father, who was an educator, made it a tradition to celebrate Juneteenth.
He would invite not just his students at Berkeley High School, but he would also invite his friends and family and members of the community, barbecuing all hours of the night. From a young age, my job was to chop onions and potatoes. And we would have a program that was intergenerational. Children would perform and read poetry, create dances, an open mic. Elders would speak and share stories of their experiences with being Black in America.
Juneteenth has been a state holiday in nearly all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Last year, in the wake of millions demonstrating against racial injustice after the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others, a bipartisan group tried to get Congress to recognize Juneteenth as a federal holiday. On Thursday, after more than 150 years, Juneteenth was established as the newest federal holiday at a White House ceremony after a bill passed earlier this week by Congress.
It's a celebration of the emancipation of African Americans who were enslaved, but it's also a day of remembrance. So I'm eager to see not only the Juneteenth holiday be recognized by the federal government, but I'm eager to see how it is recognized, how it is celebrated, how it is used as a tool of education for people, and how it can ultimately bring us more in line with what the hope of emancipation was, which is freedom for everybody. I think it can be a positive development for good for all of us.
But Justin Hansford, law professor at Howard University, also noted the dichotomy between what happened in Washington on Tuesday and current events in the state of Texas.
On the same day that Juneteenth was passed in the Senate, the state of Texas, where Juneteenth originates from, passed a law banning the teaching of the 1619 Project, banning critical race theory, banning the opportunity to teach about Black history. So it's almost like a joke where you pass a proclamation recognizing an important moment in Black history, and at the same time, on the same day, the state where that particular incident took place is passing a law banning the teaching of Black history.
HB 3979 is sponsored by Texas State Representative Steve Toth, who said in an interview with the National Review, the facts are very clear, very explicit. We don't ban, we don't discourage the discussion of anything. But Hansford says it's important to understand there is a connection between Juneteenth and the banning of certain teachings.
Don't forget that the Juneteenth story is a story about Black people who were free, but the knowledge of their freedom, the awareness of their freedom was denied to them. And here at the same time, we see that same denial of access to information and the denial of access to knowledge being written into law in the state of Texas, the state of Florida, and other states that are passing these anti-critical race theory laws.
Critical race theory, according to Hansford, is a field of study that seeks to uncover the way that race played a central role in how American society is structured. While debated by academics since the 1970s, it has only recently become a political issue.
This is a deliberate plan to politicize and whitewash history.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser.
Stop it.
Last week, Florida's Board of Education banned the theory from its public schools.
I think it'll cause people to think of themselves more as a member of a particular race or based on skin color rather than based on the content of their character.
And in Leesburg, Virginia last weekend, a rally against critical race theory teachings. Activist Patty Manders opposes anti-racism teaching that she believes trains white children to see themselves as oppressors. But while school curriculum is a lightning rod for controversy, a Juneteenth federal holiday has become law.
The bill is passed.
Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
Uganda's Africa's largest refugee host is imposing restrictions on movement after another spike in COVID-19 cases, and that's creating an even greater economic struggle for the vulnerable in urban areas. One refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo is finding a way to overcome that struggle and help other refugees. Halima Athumani has our report.
Luella Kabale arrived in Uganda in 2011 from the Democratic Republic of Congo, fleeing civil strife. She settled in Kampala, but little did she know life was going to be even more difficult. while living hand to mouth. Noella got vocational hands-on training for arts and crafts and eventually formed the Refugee Entrepreneurship Association with her small savings. Noella says the group is working to overcome perceptions that refugees are beggars by producing products to help deal with the COVID-19 pandemic.
I know putting on masks is not a guarantee, but at least it's going to enable this one person to curb the spread of COVID. So our community cannot really afford to get every person could not afford to buy a pad. So we sat down, we had the material with us. Why can't you support our own community?
The Refugee Entrepreneurship Association group consists mainly of divorcees, single mothers and youths, many of whom are victims of gender-based violence. Most of the products made by these women are sold online and during functions, and that money is used to run the association. Leonie Mudumbi says life has changed since she joined the group in 2018.
Thinking about Congo and living here, mixing those thoughts would kill us. She started by counseling us, and we then started teaching ourselves how to make all the things you see here. It really helps us.
Uganda is home to about 1.5 million refugees, 92,000 of these living in urban areas. Julius Mchunguzi, communications chief in the Prime Minister's office, says over the years, refugees have become vital members of the community.
Refugees are not just in countries as a burden. Yes, they are burdened, but they have a contribution they make. And that is precisely one of the issues that defines the refugee policy of Uganda.
The UN High Commission for Refugees has recorded 628 coronavirus cases among refugees, with almost 200 of these cases in Kampala. 11 refugee deaths have been recorded since March 2020. While the UNHCR has stepped up support for refugees in settlements during this current second wave of the pandemic, help for urban refugees is limited, says agency official Wendy Kasuja.
Now with the second wave, we are only focusing on the most vulnerable. Not everybody, it's not blanket support anymore. So we are only looking at the most vulnerable. However, in terms of health, in terms of livelihoods, that's for whoever needs it.
Uganda is currently on a partial lockdown that ends July 19th, and the restricted inter-district travel affects many refugees and locals. But by using what little savings they have and by selling their products, Kabali and her team continue to lend a hand to fellow refugees and locals. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala, Uganda.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.